Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining with us tonight for our very first SBAN conversation. And thank you for your patience with our technical difficulties. Many apologies for difficulty getting into the Zoom chat today. But to introduce myself, I am Hernease Davis, class of 2004, and I am serving as the Arts and Culture Coordinator for the Swarthmore Black Alumni Network. So tonight we're going to have a conversation around notions of Black storytelling, and I am incredibly excited to introduce our illustrious alumni panel tonight. We have Dr. Brandy Monk-Payton, Clayvon C. Harris, Don Porter, and Tayarisha Poe. They are all major contributors to the art and critique of film, cinema, television, literature, and they're creating very poignant and challenging works. We will have a discussion for the first half of our time, and then we will also leave time for an open Q&A at the end. But please feel free to type your questions to our panelists in the chat as they come to you, because we want your contribution to this conversation as well. And my wonderful fellow SBAN exec teammate, Robin Benenfield, will be helping me field your questions as we go along. So, so please just let us know what's on your mind. All right, so to officially introduce our panelists, first we have Dr. Brandy Monk-Payton. She graduated from Swarthmore in 2007 with a degree in film and media studies. She is an assistant professor of communication and media studies at Fordham University in the Bronx, NYC. Brandy's research and teaching engages with questions concerning the theory and history of African-American media representation and cultural production. Her essays have appeared in academic journals such as Film Quarterly, The Black Scholar, and Women's Studies and Communication, as well as numerous edited anthologies. She's working on her first book, tentatively titled Blackness in the Limelight, Race, Exposure, and Celebrity in Media Culture, which is a study of the form and function of Black celebrity across contemporary television and digital media through the lens of what she calls racial notoriety. And next we have Clayvon C. Harris, who's a graduate of the class of 1988 with a degree in English literature. And she earned her MFA in cinema, television, screenwriting from the University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts. After writing for a variety of TV shows, including Living Single, Star Trek Voyager, and Soul Food the series, Clayvon returned to the East Coast, where she established a career in advertising and marketing communications. Her first book is the award-winning collections of essays, Year of Trial, Year of Grace, A Catholic's Search for Faith. Clayvon's recently published book entitled Sub, Inside the Notorious School District of Philadelphia, chronicles her experience as a substitute teacher and examines the connection between education and underfinancing and the impact students with unmanaged emotional and behavioral disabilities are having in classrooms across the US. She lives and writes in the Philadelphia area, where she specializes in messaging strategy, digital content creation, and script development. And Clayvon is a member of the Writers Guild of America. And then we have Don Porter, also a graduate of the class of 88. And Don is an award-winning documentary filmmaker. Among her many notable works is the film Trapped, which explored laws regulating abortion clinics in the South, Rise, The Promise of My Brother's Keeper, which chronicled President Obama's program to address opportunity gaps facing boys and young men of color. And one of her most recent films, John Lewis, Good Trouble, explores the late Congressman John Lewis's pivotal role in the civil rights movement and his decades and decades of political and social activism. It was recently awarded the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Documentary. Dawn has been commissioned to create films for the Center for Investigative Reporting, Time and Essence magazines, the New York Times Op Docs, and Amazon. Her work has received generous support from the MacArthur, Ford, and Mellon Foundations, Tribeca Film Institute, Sundance Film Institute, Chicken and Egg Pictures, and other esteemed organizations. She is a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the Television Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the Directors Guild of America. And recently, she directed the Lifetime TV special, Women Making History, featuring an exclusive interview with Vice President Kamala Harris. And she is set to direct and executive produce Oprah Winfrey and Prince Harry's upcoming documentary series on mental illness and mental well-being for Apple TV+. And we have Tayarisha Poe, a graduate of the class of 2012 with a major in film and literature. And Tayarisha is a director, writer, and photographer from West Philly, currently based in Brooklyn. In 2017, she was selected for the Sundance Screenwriters and Directors Labs. She was also a Pew Fellow in 2017. And her first feature film, Sella and the Spades, debuted at the Sundance Film Festival in 2019 and was distributed by Amazon Studios. Her next film, The Young Wife, will be produced this summer, and she's currently working on an adaptation of Lydia Millet's A Children's Bible. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much. So I wanted to start off with some opening questions for you all, but in my specific question for you, I also would like for you to define Black storytelling. Basically for yourself, how do you constitute Black storytelling? And I want to start with Clayvon.
Oh, I was so hoping you wouldn't start with me.
Maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Wait until you hear my response.
Okay.
So I've actually, since you guys invited me, which thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation. But since you invited me to this, I've been thinking about the whole Black storytelling thing. And aside from a few traditions that I'm aware of, like the call and response tradition, the griot tradition, and things of that nature, I kind of believe that storytelling is storytelling when you really come down to it. I think what's different is the perspective and voice of the person that's telling the story, and the surrounding culture that is imbued into the story. But I think that or that all of us use the same techniques. I mean, you're still developing characters, you're still trying to get a strong through line, you're still trying to be engaging or persuasive or whatever it is your goal is at the time. So I kind of don't see a big distinction in the base of storytelling.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And would anyone else like to answer? I mean, I'll ask for Brandy and your response.
Yeah, I mean, first, thanks for having me. I feel really honored to be here with media creatives who are giving me sort of material as the academic, as the scholar, to analyze. And so thank you all for your work. I think of storytelling in the same way that I think that Clayvon does, this question of aesthetics, right, and form become really important to how voices are heard within certain traditions. I think Black storytelling, I mean, words that come to mind are imagination, particular kinds of language, rhetorical styles, performance styles that come to, cultivate a particular understanding of Blackness and its, and in all of its glory and multitudes.
Great, thank you. And Dawn.
I really love those descriptions, and leave it to an English major, a Swati English major, to have a pithy, concise, and perfectly elegant and constructed sentence. I was so hoping you would not start with me, and so I'm so glad to be able to follow Clayvon and Brandy, because they've said it so well. I think as Black creators, you know, like you bring your whole self to your work, and part of yourself is clearly your racial identity, your background. I think because we do not live in a colorblind or color neutral world, that I probably more aggressively assert my background in order to be seen. And so, um, where I think I can point to where Blackness has been important to craft is, so for example, in the John Lewis movie, um, you know, when we started making the movie, John Lewis is a well known public figure. If you know anything about him, you know he was on the Selma Bridge. Um, but I was thinking of how did he get to the bridge? And how he got to the bridge was through strategy. It was very interesting to me that when we describe John Lewis only as being brave, we negate the part of him, or we don't acknowledge the part of him that was strategic. What John Lewis also was a brilliant strategist. And I thought about that a lot in the storytelling, is making sure that people saw the intellectual capability that led Mr. Lewis to that bridge, not just putting a body in front of batons, but having a mind that was able to create, implement, execute a strategy that integrated the first city in America. That is awesome. And so I think by showing what's been left out in so many stories, I see a lot of Black creators doing that. I think I don't want to speak for anybody, but if you hear any hesitation in saying what's Black storytelling, it's because I think for me, I don't want to be limited. I don't want to be told I can't tell the story about white people or Asian people. But I do think if I was interested in those stories, I would try and figure out what I'm bringing, but what I'm missing. And I think sometimes when there's you know, when there's frustration with white storytellers telling Black stories, it's that it's not just that it's a white person's gaze, it's that people need to ask what they're missing, what they could be missing in that story. So I don't know that a white filmmaker would have been looking for Mr. Lewis's intelligence. That's I can't prove that, but that's what I think.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting to think of it as something that's additive, but also adding to the wholeness of particularly when you're profiling someone who is African American, is Black American. And for Tayarisha, I want you to answer that question, but I also wanted to start with what I kind of sent you earlier, because when I was looking through your work and looking, scouring the interwebs for information about you and what you're doing, I came across your website, and in your bio section, you actually start off your bio with what seemed like a personal philosophy on storytelling. And I wanted you to speak more about that. And from your bio, you state that you're a storyteller from West Philly. And I also want to know if that's also something that's particularly important to you and how you tell your stories, and that you believe that stories are inherently multisensory, multidimensional, and thus should be told that way. So in terms of your work and how you are as a maker and as a director in particular, can you just kind of share more about this and how it applies to your process of making?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me? I just switched to my headphones. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So it's sort of related to what Dawn was just saying about this John, or how you approach the John Lewis, or the subject, kind of the character, like the historical character of John Lewis, really, how you approached making him a full person on the screen. So I want to connect it to that. It's this idea of Black storytelling and Black filmmaking specifically for me as being anything that's concerned with what we think of as the boundlessness of Black people, as opposed to just like the freedom of Black people. Because when we think about freedom and reclaiming freedom, it's always a matter of a reclamation of something, in my eyes, as something that's been taken from you. But when we approach characters and when we approach ourselves and our perspective from a point of view of our boundlessness, that feels more like, to me at least, when I think about characters in that way, it feels more like thinking about their birthright and everything that they're entitled to because they're a human being. So that's how I think about what I consider to be like Black storytelling or Black filmmaking or Black stories or cinema or whatever. It's just anything that's concerned with the boundlessness of Black people. Because I think that that's like the most humane way to talk about everything we've been through, historically speaking.
Yeah. Thank you for expanding on that. And again, like this conversation around, I like that word boundlessness. Just kind of taking it in terms of not necessarily the word entitlement, but just this embodiment of your God-given right, or just a basic human right of being, being, and what does that mean? Yeah. No, I think that's really wonderful.
I think that description, once you put that into the conversation, it immediately thinks of how Black characters have been limited.
Exactly.
Because it forces you to say, oh my goodness, we need to emphasize, to take away this boundary because they're so often limited. And so like that's really important, I think, in explaining the genre. I'm actually really happy about this conversation. It's helping me articulate things, because I do get asked this question, and I think it's important for creators you're gonna get this question. No one asks white filmmakers, what is white filmmaking?
Yeah. If only they did, because it's an interesting question that needs to be asked. And if they did,
perhaps they would think about it.
Yeah.
And think about, how their boundaries limit others. So.
We can still keep talking about this. So Clayvon, if you want to expound upon that, I'm going to ask you another question, but feel free to add any thoughts that might have come up. But I also want to particularly focus on the many mediums that you have had experience in. Like, you've been a television writer, your recent memoir, you worked in the Philadelphia school system. And in terms of how you approach your process, I was wondering if you could talk about the differences and the similarities in storytelling within these various arenas, if there are any differences, and also if you have any thoughts on the current conversation.
Yeah, so backtracking a little bit, I want to say I think it's very, very thoughtful the way that you guys couch the idea of Black storytelling. And I think that in addition to what you all are saying, I think when I start to develop a story that's fiction, not something that's real, when I'm dealing with stuff that's real, then I think that there is more of an approach to what is that missing component? What are we not seeing? What makes this, what has made this situation the way it is, or this person the way they are? I think when it's the other side, when we're talking about developing a fictional character who's Black, for me, I mean, I could be wrong, but I think I start from a place of, this is limitless. I'm not looking at how that person is limited. I'm looking at all of the, I think the approach is a little more, I think there's a little more freedom, because it's not just what's been taken away from that character, but it's also what that character brings, so it's just a matter of like a difference in the shift, the focus. So now jumping over to the other question that you raised about the different genres, and they are very different, but they are interrelated. And I've been thinking about that, how I came to there's a whole long story about how I came to the book that I just finished, inside the notorious school district of Philadelphia, and I won't, hold up the Zoom with all of that. But I was just thinking that there are so many skills that I've learned along the way. I was thinking that at Swarthmore, what I learned is how to analyze and be analytical, which was a very important component of this book. After I graduated from Swarthmore, I worked in marketing communications, and again worked in marketing communications when I moved back to Philadelphia. So, and from the copywriting aspect, where you learn to explain complex ideas and terms and just complicated issues in a way that is simple. You learn to simplify things so that you're able to share it with other people, and so that you don't bore them to death, as you're trying to share this information. So that's what I learned from copywriting, because it's really focused on persuasion and explanation. And then when I went to USC, what they taught me there was how to tell a story, how to be engaging, how to hook an audience, how to develop your characters, how to make sure you're sticking with the through line of your story all the way through your script. And really that very specific thing of how to develop a scene from the beginning to the end. So I felt like I used all of these different skills when I was working on this last book, because it's a combination book. It's not just my experiences in the classrooms with the kids, with the other teachers, and what's happening there. Because like you call it a memoir, I don't think of it as a memoir at all, because I feel like I'm irrelevant in the story. I'm irrelevant. I'm every man, which is something that I learned about at Swarthmore. I'm every man, any reasonable adult who would be dropped into this system, and how they react to that system. So, I think the main star is the school district of Philadelphia, and then the supporting characters are the children and the other teachers, and the system itself. So, but I had to, in order to convey what I was experiencing on a day-to-day basis, I had to be able to create a scene quickly, because it follows me from day to day to different schools. And you don't have the time to tell everything, but you need to kind of convey quickly what's happening in that school, what is the nature of that environment, what are the children like, and what are they experiencing, and then is it the same thing at the next school and the next school and the next school? And in Philadelphia, the answer is yes, it is, for about 85% of the schools. So I use the storytelling abilities in trying to establish the story of Sub, and trying to engage people, and trying to actually entertain them a little bit as they're reading through, because there are some things that were interesting, some things that were tragic, some things that were maybe a little funny. But then as I get into the next section of the book, I'm using my analytical skills, and I'm using my research skills, and I'm using my copywriting skills in order to, analyze and break down what exactly is going on with the system, and what is the problem. So I think that all of these different types of writing are very important. I think it's important for people to have that experience, because I feel like any type of writing that you do teaches you, and it adds to your skills, and it makes your ability to execute your craft all the better. So I felt like all of these things came to bear in this one particular project. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it definitely does, because it's a practice, and I'm glad that you said that, because it is your craft, and it's something that the more you do it, of course, but also in terms of and I feel like we don't really have to put a category or a genre label on Sub in particular, because which I think is incredibly interesting. because it speaks to notions of how you have used all of these experiences that you've had in crafting stories or engaging audiences, you know, definitely with TV, sitcoms, and drama, and also with your analytical skills, and also, you know, all of our experience at Swarthmore. I think we've written, I don't think I've ever written as much as I've ever written my whole entire life as I did while at Swarthmore.
Never will again.
Yeah, and and it's something that I feel I've started to feel out of practice, and remembering when it was difficult, and but also so fulfilling, and in a practical way of grasping onto an experience of information, and how to convey and communicate my own thoughts with it. And I think with Sub in particular, using a first person narrative, the way you kind of flow through, or even hearing about the structure, it sounds like the way we move through life as conscious people. So you're moving through life, you're bringing your whole self, and you're noticing, putting things together in your analytical mind, is trying to make sense of something that needs attention to be called to it, in the way that you know how, as the only way that, you know, for instance, that you, with your experience and your background and your proclivities, could, which I think is really wonderful and amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. And let's see here. Yeah, and I don't know if anyone else would like to respond to that, or to anything that Clayvon has just said.
You know, I think, so my first career is in law, and I describe to people very often that what a lawyer does, I was a litigator, is take something complicated and make it comprehensible, and you tell a story about it. Mm-hmm. So I really related to what you're describing about different forms of writing and persuasion, because all of that has been helpful to me as, you know, I create a story in documentary film. So I think, like, one thing for people to you know, to think about is your experiences may come from different places, and so not to discount any of them, because each of them it contributes to who you are as a full person, but also contributes to your skills and makes you unique. And it's leaning into those differences, I think, that makes you an original, you know, original thought protagonist. So
yeah, and it actually makes me, so it kind of brings me to Brandy, Dr. Brandy Monk-Payton. And just full disclosure, Brandy was my freshman. She was my first year.
This was my RA.
Yeah, on Parish 4th, like way back when. And so it just, but in terms of just who you are and bringing and thinking about your sensibilities and your uniqueness and your experience, so Brandy, my question to you is about what you're studying and what you're engaging and teaching in now. But I also saw not the beginnings of it, but I noticed it during your first year, the types of conversations that you were having with the other freshmen, mainly around pop culture. And at Swarthmore, I was a senior at the time. I remember thinking, like, oh, well, this is what we're talking about. Brandy's talking about Britney Spears in a really serious way. Like,
I really and now there's a documentary, and I'm like, well, yes, I wrote my master's thesis on that.
Exactly.
Ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and I mean, and so in terms of just like that's, you know, as long as I've known you, and as I've been following your work, it's so consistent, and so wonderfully you. And I'm, you know, I'll just kind of piggyback and say I'm glad you're doing the work that you do. But so since you're studying and teaching around these notions about Black representation in particular, and representation of Black narratives in both scripted and unscripted reality TV programming, yeah, just want you to talk about what you find to be distinctly important in or some notable examples of scripted or even unscripted television that is important in Black representation. And in important, I don't necessarily, I'm not putting a judgment on that. I just mean significant to you, and something that maybe perhaps that you've used as a framework.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And yeah, it's been a long journey going from being a special major in film and media studies back when it was not an actual department to sort of then going on to get my PhD in media and cultural studies, and then to teach it and to teach African American cinema and a TV race and civil rights class and a reality TV class. I think, it's that whole issue of sort of the boundlessness is so important, and something that I really try to think through with students. I think, we still get so caught up in stereotype analysis, right? This kind of, when we talk about Black media representation, I see it with students, but I just see it with audiences as well. There's this kind of this real sort of desire to move beyond it, but not really understanding how to, right? Like, what are the ways in which, and I think that so much of the work being done now gives us the strategies for doing so, right? I think about your work, all of your work here. I think about, a TV show like Random Acts of Flyness. I think about Garrett Bradley's Time, which I think should have won the Oscar. There are so many, I think media makers, creatives, Black creatives right now who are really sort of pushing the boundaries of representation and the sort of conditions of possibility, right? That sort of Black folks can have visually and sonically, right? And so, it's always interesting. I think in my work, first writing a book on Black celebrity, and I'm also in the midst of starting a book on what I'm kind of calling Black Lives Matter television, right? Or what is this kind of moment that we're in where sort of storytelling is sort of geared towards thinking around questions of anti-Black violence, racial justice, et cetera. And so, academic writing can be really dry. Surprise, all of you know this. But I do, I always want my work to orient itself towards Black people, right? And to really sort of look at those archives, particular figures, moments, that are really important for Black culture that don't necessarily get the kind of mainstream, media attention. And I think, in scholarly writing, there's always this kind of balance, particularly when you're talking about film and media representation, to sort of look at, what I'm calling sort of like the three prongs, right? So you look at the text, right? You look at the object itself, the TV program, the film, which is not neutral, right? There is a creative behind it. And certainly we can sort of talk about, creatives' intentions in our work, but I also like to look at, what is a text trying to say to an audience? How do audiences receive various media artifacts, right? There's, Black media production, there's such a symbiotic relationship between Black media creatives and audiences, right? And the kind of pleasure that is sort of cultivated, amongst Black folks when watching programs that don't actually even have to be sort of, created by Black people, right? So, I'm thinking of, various programs, Watchmen in some respects, right? I think that's another kind of program that really sort of piqued the imagination of audiences. And then also thinking about, you know, the text, the audience, and then the industry more broadly, you know, thinking about the ways in which certain, you know, certain media are talked about within broader popular culture and on Twitter. I think this all, it's messy. It's a really messy endeavor to bring all of these you know, elements to bear on how one might approach a piece of creative work. And so that's what I'm trying to, you know, do in my work. And again, sort of really thinking about, you know, what it means to sort of turn away from, you know, what we might call the white gaze, right? And sort of thinking about, you know, and celebrating the work that we do and the meanings that we make out of work.
Yeah. Does anyone want to respond to Brandy, or does that spark anything? Any thoughts with anyone else?
You know, I had a thought there at the end of what you were saying, and you were talking about, you know, the idea of, you know, moving away from, and I think Dawn alluded to this as well, or spoke to this, about moving away from the white gaze and looking at the Black gaze. And I think that I really like the idea of what you're calling this Black Lives Matter type television and filmmaking, where we're exploring racial justice and, you know, all of these extraordinarily important issues. But I also think back to a time when we may have gotten the opportunity in the past. Well, there was, you know, there are two sides to it, but, you know, but having the opportunity to create Black programming and then not always living up to the expectations that I think many of us hoped. You know, there were, you know, there were times that Black people were responsible for the stereotypes of Black people, you know, and that, you know, that's just something that I'm hoping that we'll be aware of. You know, it seems like this is just such an extraordinary time when the doors are opening and people are pushing through and they are telling their stories. And it's such a, and I'm speaking about Black people in particular, and other people of color. And I think it's such a wonderful time. But there's a little bit of me that is a little bit hesitant about it. I'm hoping that so far it's been great. I've been seeing some really amazing stuff. But, you know, there's that little bit of fear in the back that someone will come through the gate and they won't necessarily feel the weight of the responsibility of what they're doing. Because, you know, back 20 years ago, when you had certain shows out there that were being exported all over the world, you know, you had the shows that were run by white people. I mean, and some of them were great, but some of them really did kind of minimize Black characters and the complexity of our lives, or just, you know, portrayed us as, you know, the stereotypes, mammies, pimps, drug dealers, et cetera, and all of that was exported. So we had the exportation around the world of Black people as, you know, just kind of like these substandard humans, and then we kind of a lot of us followed on the heels of that with, okay, it's going to be you know, it's going to be a sitcom, it's going to be fun, and we're going to, you know, we're just going to enjoy and blah, 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 blah. And then sometimes it got to a point where it was just silly, you know, where you had Black people representing themselves as silly, and but not always Black people, because 50% of the majority of the Black sitcoms that have been on television were staffed by white people. So we weren't doing it by ourselves. And then I also think that it was difficult for people of of color to make the switch over. I know I found it difficult for me when I decided that I wanted to leave sitcoms and move over to drama because I wanted to deal with a little bit more complexity in storytelling. And I found that I was pigeonholed for a couple of reasons. One, because I started my career in sitcoms and I had a lot of the drama people just not willing to give me a chance because of that. But even more so, I found that I wasn't being given a chance because I was a Black woman, you know, and there were times when I showed up to meetings and I actually had showrunners or executives say to me, "Oh, I didn't know you were Black," you know,
Like out loud to that?
out loud.
Oh gosh.
You know,
One thing if it's in your inside voice.
right, but no,
Right.
I mean out loud to my face. "Oh, I thought your name was Clayvon Harris. You know, I thought you were Scandinavian guy." You know, and then had a great meeting with this woman where she, you know, raved about my script and we found that we had all these things in common. She had gone to a school like Swarthmore. And at the end of the, and I'm thinking, okay, she's going to give me a shot. And then at the end of the meeting, she, you know, basically said, "Yeah, you would have been perfect for my last show, which featured a Black family." But because her new show did not feature a Black family, there was, in her mind, there was just no way that I could write that show, even though the script that she read that she liked that caused her to invite me to a meeting was not about a Black show. You know, it was a law show. And, you know, that had a couple of Black characters in it, but the stories were not solely focused on the Black characters. And I had that experience multiple times. Multiple times. I had, you know, someone say to my agent, "We loved her. We just really don't know what to do with her. We don't have any Black dramas," you know? So I think that we kind of had a couple of things going on. So I think that, you know, back in the day, I think it was difficult for a lot of Black people to make that crossover into drama. You know, they were very accepting of us creating sitcoms, but they were not necessarily accepting of us doing stuff that was a little bit weightier or a little bit meatier, you know.
Yeah.
And then
I'm really curious, Tayarisha, like when you wrote Sela and the Spades, was she always Black character? I mean, like this is like
Always.
yeah, indie
She was
film.
always, oh yeah, totally. I think that she was always Black. She always, like, they always dealt drugs in the movie. They were always like that. And in a way, like everything that you're speaking about, Clayvon, in a weird way, worked in favor for getting this created, because what you're speaking about is well known, well documented. It's obvious. Like, you know, there are studies done on how much money Hollywood loses because of how
$10
little they
billion.
put into
That was
billions, $10 billion. Yeah. So it's like very obvious and talked about. And because of how obvious it was, the lack of support for Black filmmakers and Black stories, particularly around Black girls, particularly around darker skinned Black girls, because of all of those things, you know, in all of my pitches, I pointed out the lack thereof. And I used that to my advantage because I basically used people's guilt. I mean, the way that we financed our film was through Sundance Catalyst. It's this program where you pitch to investors. And we built like a consortium of like 20 some odd investors of various just people who wanted to support the film and to support what we were trying to do and create. And I think that very, very early on into writing the project, a big part of why I wanted to write it and why it was important to me that these were kids who were going to prep school and who were dealing drugs is because I didn't want to fall into the trap of, or what I see is a trap as a writer and as a storyteller of like, you know, either creating a stereotype or creating like a model minority character. I didn't want to do either. I felt like, you know, sometimes people deal drugs and they're cool and they're totally fine and it's just a job. It's like an occupation, like other things, you know, they're dealing drugs on the street. Some people deal drugs in pharmaceutical companies, that sort of thing. But that was important to me because I wanted to tell a story that people were reluctant to be empathetic towards, because I thought that that was a character who most required empathy. And that was important to me. I thought that it would be kind of a cop-out for me in terms of what my goal was, which was to have people see themselves as this teenage Black girl who's dealing drugs, and to see themselves within her. And in order to do that, I needed to make her, for me, easy to love, but I knew for the wider public, I needed to make her difficult to empathize with, so that when they empathized with her, they crossed a larger chasm.
Can I ask a question? How did you do that? How did you, I'm sorry. How did you get them to cross the chasm? And I apologize, I haven't seen your film, but.
No, it's fine, it's fine. How did I get them to cross the chasm? I think Barry Jenkins said the specific is universal. And so for me, I just was as specific as possible. Like, I took details from my own life to make this character even more unlike anybody that you'd probably met. Like, I gave her my boarding school background. Like, I gave her things that just were, I gave her as many details and specificities that made her as odd and as specific as possible. And I think that weirdly that made, like, I don't know, I say as make her as fictional as possible, but she's incredibly recognizable to me. She's all of my best friends. Like, she's everybody that I know and love. She's so recognizable, I think, to especially a lot of Black women and a lot of people who were Black girls, basically.
I think she's a great character. She's a full character. You know, she leaves her school world where she's basically crafted her persona, and then you see her at home, and you see, which is a lot of us. You go away, you can start over. You can be whoever you are. But I am noticing, you know, Clayvon and Nikki, without making us feel 107, it's 25 years later that Tayarisha is working. And so I think part of the way that this has happened is, unfortunately, you telling your story about being excellent, and yet people don't know what to do with you. What is that? You don't know what to do with a good writer? What are you talking about? No one today, well, I don't know that they would say it out loud today. I get a lot like, why don't you do scripted? And I'm like, because I can do what I want in documentary, and you all have spent the last 10 years telling me how impossible it is in features. Do I look stupid? Why would I bang my head against a wall? So, you know, craft.
Oh, it's still not, it's still, I do want to say, they still say stuff like, I don't know what to do with her, and all of, like, it still applies. But there are, like, so many more people who
and I think
you know what to do.
But I think also you owning the idea that, you know, I don't care why people want to support the movie. If they support the movie and it's good, it creates another data point for all the rest of the movies. And you know, the most important thing to me in my career is that I kept working, because you know, so for, when was your movie at Sundance? It was a few years ago. I was here in 2019. So now we're coming to 2022. Like, she needs to have another movie out, right? And so that's what happens is, everybody else coming out of Sundance, if you're a white boy, you get an offer, right? You have a successful movie that's well reviewed out of Sundance, you get a bigger movie.
And like, I want to be honest really quickly, that happened. Like, I did Sundance, and as soon as it happened, I got this first look deal for my next movie that we're doing this summer. And like, I got like a show offer. It felt like a very weirdly like white boy trajectory, to be totally frank. And I don't think that would have happened 5 years ago. I don't know if that would have happened 2 years ago. Like, I think that things have very swiftly shifted, at least in the world of like fictional media. I think the change has been a lot swifter. I think 5 years ago, it was really just Ava DuVernay in terms of like name fiction feature filmmakers being released in theaters.
Yeah.
Like, there weren't that many.
Yeah.
And before that, it was Tyler Perry, right? I think that it's important to talk about those histories. Is that there's Black cast sitcoms in the 90s, and then we switch and then they come back on streaming, right? So there's all these histories that are really important to look at, and the patterns, right? The kind of scarcity, I would even say scarcity, abundance, and
there's in terms of people that I know who've had things greenlit this year so far, I honestly believe part of some of those successes are because of like the restreaming of those Black sitcoms and just the success of those restreams and people discovering the shows and talking about them. And so that just resparks this idea. It just, it makes people understand what they let go in a weird way.
And I think that there's this idea that it's new. I do also think we're living in a particular social time where people are rethinking their filters. And I think, something Tayarisha said, which is really important, is take advantage of that.
Please.
Lean into that. And because this moment could pass, it probably will pass. So, whatever the path is there, if you're, a person who's tried, I think the other thing is to do not buy into the myth of, the being blessed by an Oscar or whatever, or not, has anything to do with your talent. And I think it's very hard. We all went to Swarthmore, which means by definition we're overachievers. And you see a lot of women here, which means double overachievers. And we need to think, we need to be qualified. Well, I think we need to let go of that and don't wait for the perfect. The other thing I would say to people is it's very much a business of relationships. And so people, even if they love your script, they need to like you as a person. And it makes a big difference if they can have dinner with you and be comfortable. So if you're not comfortable, get a producer who is. Because
that's a big one.
That's actually one of my other questions for you guys in terms of what role does I use the word community, so because I wanted to keep it as open as possible, and what role that plays in your work, and so just in terms of that, and also and then we'll open it up to other questions, and I have some questions from the chat for you guys. But
community is huge, because if you think about what you're asking for an investor or a financier or a studio or a network, you're asking them to give you 7 figures. In the end, while they do want it to be this creative genius, they want you to be on budget, on time. They'd rather you be okay and make a modest return than to not deliver and be genius. So getting that track record of being a good partner, it makes you a better filmmaker, and it also makes you a more trusted partner for people to come back to. And that gets back to something else, which I think is so important, which I think is a little underestimated, is keeping working. So I think in some ways people can be genre agnostic. And, if I film a commercial or I film a whatever, it's still filming, it's storytelling. And as you keep exercising those muscles, you get better at it. You get better dealing with crews. You get more expedient in getting, your day done. You learn how to be a leader. Directing is as much leading and being confident wherever you are as it is about the creativity. The creativity is like the price of showing up. It's the leading part where people often, and some of that is, we get questioned, our choices get questioned. So I learned fairly early, if somebody's questioning, I send them home. Because ain't nobody got time for that. And their questions will plant questions in the rest of your crew. So if somebody doubts my choices or my desires, or ask me more than once, are you sure? Then they don't come back.
if it's okay, I'm going to put in a question from our chat, and also just we can continue to talk about community, because I know for all of you guys, it plays a different role, and it would be wonderful to hear about that. This question is actually for Brandy, and this is from, is it from Robin? Okay, it's Robin's question. So Robin says, my Black Studies thesis was representations of Blacks in film. So Dr. Monk-Payton's course of study is thrilling. Also thrilled to know there is a film major. How did Swarthmore contribute to your path as a storyteller? Did it? What's something you took away and still use in your storytelling?
And that can be for everyone if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I started out as a psych major, and then I like realized after the lovely Patty White, who is still there, I realized I got like a C in abnormal psychology and got like an A in my intro to film class, and watched, Singing in the Rain, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. We can like do this. So I think that, and also during Swarthmore, it was important for me, I didn't consider myself a maker, but I did take a couple of I took an visual anthropology class, right, and doing kind of ethnography, right, and so that did put me behind the camera. I did study abroad in South Africa and did documentary filmmaking there, and that was really helpful for me. One, to know that I didn't want to do that, and also to sort of think about, to just start to think critically about media. I think Swarthmore allowed me to see differently. And so that's what I hope that I'm doing now with students as well.
Great. And I have another question from Taylor Tucker. What is one of the most compelling, resonant, moving, or riveting pieces of media you've experienced and stuck with you in the past few years? Another way of putting it, if you had a must-watch, listen, read, what would be your first few suggestions?
You know what? I'll answer that. For me, I think it was recently Lovecraft Country. And I say that because while I was familiar with the ideas of the sundown towns, and how Black people were just oppressed during that time period, and how segregated things were, I think watching it on the screen, on the little screen week after week, and just really just seeing how completely out of control it was back then, it makes it make a little bit more sense to me now how out of control it is, because it's sort of hard for me. I understand the issues of racism and just the dehumanizing of Black people that allows police officers to shoot first and then think about later on, what, another way that they may have been able to de-escalate a situation. But there's just like this, this history of it. We have a strong history of it. And even though I've had conversations with friends where I said, this is not new, this has been going on for a long time, but still watching it, on the screen, Lovecraft, it's just like actually seeing it, seeing how how shamelessly they harassed the Black people as they drove through their communities was just, it was really extraordinarily painful, but really made a strong impression on me.
Yeah, I'll go. Yeah, I mean, one thing about the sort of pandemic moment is that I was able to access material that I wouldn't have had before, right? I wouldn't have, been able to go to a theater or, to see the premiere of something, independent. I just recently rented Test Pattern by Shatara Michelle Ford, and it's an independent film that is about a Black woman who is in an interracial couple and sort of the aftermath of a kind of sexual assault, right? And sort of going around, and it's a thriller that's very that's also a drama, and it really stood out to me as a sort of, this kind of quotidian story that I think we're so looking for now, and was just really intimate and tender in a way that I hadn't seen in a while. So.
I saw this movie recently called, for the first time, it came out in 2017. It's called I Am Not a Witch. It was so amazing. It was phenomenal. I think I saw it on, no, it was on the Criterion Channel or Mubi, one of those like indie platforms. But it was amazing. It was funny in ways I wasn't expecting. It also kind of vaguely reminded me of that movie Atlantiques that came out last year or the year before, just in terms of this surreal, fabulistic, continental storytelling. So I recommend both of those. Also this movie Little Joe, which is sort of like this like climate fiction kind of. It's very good. It's this British film. And A Children's Bible, the book by Lydia Millett. It's really another climate fiction story. It's really fantastic.
I really loved Minari, if you haven't seen it yet. And I think, as Black people, we know something of our story, and we're always sometimes shouting into the wind about our story. And I appreciated, I almost felt like a white person. I felt like, oh, the Asian discrimination has been invisible to me. And it's important that I have this feeling of, thinking like, what have I missed in that story? And so I felt some empathy for people I'm usually annoyed at. But I also just really, it's just so well written and beautifully filmed, and the acting is just superior. Multiple generations. Each of the characters is except for the little sister, is like really well drawn. So I just appreciated challenging my own, blind spots in such a beautiful way.
Yeah, I think it's actually, it's also great to know that you have blind spots and to not to acknowledge those as with anger or annoyance, but with what else am I missing? What more do I need to know? I think that in and of itself is a really wonderful approach to those types of works. I mean, I didn't get a chance to really speak to Seal and the Spades, Tayarisha. I'll just say that the complexity behind that character, because that's what I would recommend. So if no one has, if you guys haven't seen Seal and Spades yet, I highly recommend watching it, because I really enjoyed the depth and the complexity that that Dawn's already alluded to about that character in particular. And I think it's wonderful that you made it so specific, because there, what spoke to me and what's actually, that still sticks with me is how you used her to, or how she broke the fourth wall and was the only, so in terms of talking about these wonderful storytelling devices, how she broke the fourth wall was a way that I'd never experienced it before. And I found myself kind of sobbing at the end of the film, with the type of eye contact that she continually would make throughout the film. And so I found it to be very touching, even though that was not my experience. I went to public school. Swarthmore was my first time away from home the way that I was away from home. But I also recognized her home life in a way that I haven't really seen reflected on the screen. So that was a very poignant experience for me in particular. So,
I'm glad.
Yeah. And we're running low on time, so I just want to see if anyone from our wonderful audience have any other questions, and if anything's on your mind, and feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask your question. Because I have more. I could, yeah, go ahead, Nicole. Go ahead.
So I've taken a number of different film related training sessions, and I know the industry is growing as far as representation, but when I've done a number of these classes, a lot of times I'm still the only one in there. And it's very frustrating to me, especially when, I remember one class in particular where everyone was supposed to bring an idea of something a story idea that they thought would be compelling. And it was particularly focused on documentaries. And, I think it was a class of about 30, approximately maybe 25. There was one looked like Indian woman, I can't say what she was, one gentleman, myself, and everyone else was a white woman. And a number of the people who were relaying their idea was this like poor, pitiful Black person who has this horrible story, and they want to share their I don't know, pitiful, I'll call it pitiful story. I don't know what adjective you want to use, but it was frustrating to me because, as Dawn had talked about before, how are they going to tell that story? Will they tell it maybe of a point of empowerment or something else, or will it come across as a sort of pitiful character? And so my question is, even though opportunities are growing, I know when you're working on a lot of films, it matters whether you have someone on there who's made films. But if there aren't that many of us, there, how do you get to that point of being able to get the support to make films when there aren't that many of us? And when I say that many, as I said, I know it's growing, but again, I still out there. I just don't see, I'm used to being the only one.
I think that this is a really important question, and we see it a lot in documentary. And in fact, that's why I started making films. I was working as a lawyer, and then I did standards and practices, and I saw so many stories about people who look like us, but not by people who look like us. And I just felt like there was a need. So I right now I'm working with HBO on the reboot of Eyes on the Prize, and they have very specifically asked for us to search out creators of color, and it's hard. There are not enough people. Simultaneously, we all want this to be the most excellent. It's eyes, like you got to come correct for eyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say is it may not be possible within the time and the budget that you have to have the director that you want, or that lead person, but you can create a community around the project, and it might just be you. So you're filling in your team, because nobody makes a movie or a television show by themselves. Like, that's just fiction. So you might be filling in your team with people who have other skill sets, and I would do a good look, but I wouldn't limit yourself, because, as you say, there are people who don't have the credentials in order to get that green light. So if you don't have them, work with a producer of any background who is sympathetic, empathetic, and is going to really collaborate. That's the most important thing. So finding a great producer is really essential. And if you have good idea, and even more important, good access, because the number one thing for documentary that's important is not just the idea, but it's the access to tell the story. And you might be the person who can secure that. So I worked with an experienced, I don't edit, I don't shoot, I say to my kids, like, I don't do anything useful. So I needed to partner with people who did have those skill sets. But I did have the idea and I had the ability to connect, with subjects. And that's, for me, I'm like, that's good enough. Like, that's what I bring to the table. And then surrounding yourself with also people you like to work with. People can tell sincere people who the first thing is to know what you don't know, and be able to say what you don't know. So.
Yeah. Anyone else would like to respond to that?
To that point, I wanted to ask about folks like Ava DuVernay, who has Array now, that are, seem to be lifting up other voices. Is that the answer that, once we kind of get in the door, that we got to reach back and pull other people through to make sure that we're telling as many of our stories as possible?
I think that's
talk a
part of
little
the
bit about
answer.
that community. Yeah.
I think that's part of the answer. But I also think that it's a matter of peers as well, not just whoever's actually already made it, but a lot of the opportunities that I've been afforded have been from people that I've just worked with as a photographer or as a stills photographer who I'm on the same level with or whatever. And it's more, we're helping each other build projects that we want to make because other people aren't making them. And so we're just going to help each other. And then that's the project that we put out, and that's what gets people shine. So I do think that what Dawn is saying about community is really important because it's not always, because there are only so many Avas in the world, and there's so many more people who are down to make things and who have the skills that you don't have, who are willing to and excited to partner with you because of ideas and because of your excitement about the project. So I don't think that it's always you being the person who knows how to do all those things. Sometimes it's always about collaboration, basically. And I think sometimes that collaboration, is from somebody who's higher up in the ranks than you, but a lot of the times I find that collaboration is lateral.
Yeah. I think also there's a New York Times article, I think it was yesterday, about how Ava's not up for an Oscar, but it's still her year because of all the work that she does do. And one thing, oops, sorry, freezing. One thing I just want to stress about that is she's kind of made it a second, third, and fourth job, and not everybody has that capacity. So I just want to give like some empathy to people who can't manage. It's not necessarily because there's not the will. It's just that is really a full-time job. It's, that is part of our black tax, is you feel that you want to do that, but you also have to keep working in order to have these opportunities. So just compassion when folks can't answer you. Ava can't, as much as she does, she still got her career. So I think, to Nick's point, like I think this helps. I think, seeing people who are actually doing things helps. And, we really need to build up, our capacity. We need to have more people, like, staffing up for some projects. Like right now, everybody wants to have a BIPOC director, everybody. But they go the same 5 people. Yeah. So, and there's no like taking a chance on somebody. And that applies also, like I'm trying to staff things. I still have to get the network to approve. So like I have several series going. I have to get the network to approve. If I'm like, you know what, I don't need to direct every episode of this series. I'd like so-and-so to do it. So-and-so who I recommended, who has 2 feature films in a series, I still am arguing to get that person approved as a lead director. So, there's, I don't know what I'm saying, but.
Yeah, no,
it's like resistance along the way. Yeah, go ahead.
Really quickly. I mean, I think that, this maybe seem counterintuitive, but I think that, yes, we have to take risks. I also think, you know, storytelling, Black storytelling needs the opportunity to fail as well. And not fail in the sense of, you know, someone just, you know, does it, you know, cancels a show or something. But I mean, aesthetically, to like fail. I think that we'll sort of know what we have in terms of our abundance and the sort of possibilities when we can see things and be like, no, like, you know, this is not, you know, what we want to be doing. And so, yeah, just I think failure is a really critical praxis as well to sort of have in mind as we are so precarious as well, to just sort of know that.
That's oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Clayvon. No,
I was gonna say that's a really good point. You know, I think that for a very long time, there was just a lot of pressure on the few who got through, you know, or the few who were, you know, able to make a film or who were running a show or whatever they were doing, you know, and a lot of times I think they didn't feel like they had the luxury of failing. And what happens often, especially with white males, is they fail up.
Yes.
You know, they have a movie that does not do well. And so then what happens? They get another movie with a bigger budget. It's not just the success that propels them forward, it's also the failure. And I think that we do have to get to a place where we're comfortable with that, and also where we are comfortable with critiquing each other, and critiquing films. And, you know, very often, you know, and television shows, you don't want to say anything negative about something that was created by someone who is Black. And still, I mean, I feel uncomfortable saying stuff like that in public, you know. But, you know, behind the scenes, people will say, hey, I didn't like that, or I didn't think that was good, or I thought, you know, this could have been whatever.
And that is a recipe for disaster. Because if people are saying it behind the scenes, then what they do is they just ice you out and they don't hire you.
Yeah.
And because the stakes are seen as,
you can't grow if you're not.
The stakes are so high, right? Like you're talking, Clayvon, and you know, that burden of representation.
Yeah.
I just want to say, Robin put into the chat, coming to America, which I think is a whole other conversation we could have about critiquing.
Part two.
Say whatever. I'm an academic. I don't know.
Tyler Perry. Last night, the Oscars honored Tyler Perry, you know, and I bet none of those people have seen any of his movies.
Well, what's amazing about it is that he changed nothing about himself to get that honorary Oscar. So I think the discourse around him is fascinating still. But
it's a whole.
Let's think about what
written pieces about him.
But let's think about what that Oscar was for. And, you know, he truly deserved it. It was for his humanitarian efforts, and he has truly gone above and beyond and extended himself to so many people without being asked, you know. And I felt like he deserved that Oscar.
I do too. I just thought it was really interesting moment. Did not at the time of day.
I was kind of amazed by the strong Black presence, you know, throughout the entire show. I was, you know, normally I think the Oscars are pretty boring, and I can't say that I thought it was riveting this time around either. But what held me was that there was, you know, the representation, which I thought was pretty amazing. And so, you know, I did stick around and watch the whole thing.
Yeah. I have to hop off.
Yes.
Actually.
Thank you so much. And I'm gonna just end us here, cut us off in the middle of a really wonderful and riveting conversation. And thank you to everyone for joining with us. Someone put in the chat that this would be a great think tank. I feel like there's so many more conversations that we could have that just kind of stems from your experiences and the work that you guys are doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you for assembling us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.